Okay, this is a presentation on basic digital accessibility. My name is Audrey Homan. I'm a certified digital accessibility specialist, a staff member at the University of Vermont, and I work for the UVM Office of Accessibility Services as a web and digital accessibility specialist. We're going to be covering today the basic tenets of digital accessibility that UVM is asking everyone, staff, faculty, and students to take very seriously as we move towards improving the accessibility of life at the University of Vermont. So, first, let's talk about why digital accessibility is important. Digital accessibility affects a lot of people. So, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, estimate that as of 2022, 1 in 4 Vermonters have at least one disability. And when we look at the data nationwide, Vermont is actually on the low end of a percentage of people with disabilities living in our state. The state with the lowest number of people with disabilities in the United States is actually the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. It's down at 21% of people living there have at least one disability. And on the other end of the spectrum, the highest number of people with disabilities living in Arkansas and Oklahoma. They're both tied for uh, last place with 38% of people living there having at least one disability. But if we take into account territories, then you have to consider Puerto Rico also has 42% of the people living there having at least one disability. Now, why am I getting into the weeds with these numbers? I'm getting into the weeds here. We're talking about these numbers and really unpacking them because that is a lot of people. Think about how many people have watched this presentation, how many people have come to this basic digital accessibility workshop, and think that 1 in 4 of those, myself included, have at least one disability. And then you expand to that nationwide view, and the numbers just go up. And it's actually even more than that when we talk about accessibility, because digital accessibility affects people with permanent disabilities, people with temporary disabilities, and people in situational disabilities. What does that mean? So, what's an example of a permanent disability? A permanent disability is a disability that will not ever go away. So you think of something like cerebral palsy, which is a set of neuromuscular conditions that happens generally at or around birth. That is a lifelong condition. People have blindness or deafness from birth onwards. Those are examples of permanent disabilities. Now, a temporary disability is one that resolves after a certain time. So think about if you break your arm, for example, or even after if you're sick, you have a migraine, something like that. That is going to resolve. That's a disability while it's happening, but it is going to resolve. And then people in situational disabilities. This occurs when the environment is causing a disability that can be removed when you remove yourself from the environment. What does that mean? If you are in bright sunlight trying to look at a screen, you have a situational disability. It's hard to see, even for people who are not blind or not low vision, it's hard to see on the screen in direct sunlight. If you want to watch a video, you want to consume a video on a bus, and you forgot your headphones at home, that's a situational disability. And you're going to maybe play it with the sound off and depend on the accuracy of the captions to understand it. That's a situational disability. Now, digital accessibility also expands your audience. It's something you can use to make your work more effective, to make the work that you do more work for you. So current search engine algorithms take accessibility into account. When Google is ranking content to return to people who are searching for specific terms, Google is ranking content that is accessible more highly than content that is inaccessible. So that is going to improve and expand the number of people who see your work. Your work is going to get in front of more eyeballs. As those can be some important metrics to be able to share with leadership so that you can share how important and effective your work is. And also, digital accessibility has legal implications. So, in 2024, the Department of Justice revised Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. And this revision incorporates all of the WCAG 2.1 double A level guidelines. It means that all public entities, of which the University of Vermont is one, must meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG guidelines. As of April 2027, digital accessibility for websites, web applications, digital documents, multimedia, and social media is mandated by law for public entities such as the University of Vermont. I have an asterisk next to April 2027 because UVM senior leadership has asked the campus to try to make as many strides as possible towards this level of accessibility by April of 2026. So that is what we are all pulling together to do. Now, let's talk about some digital accessibility basics. Let's start with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines themselves. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG, that is the way that people pronounce the acronym for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. They're a set of international guidelines for meeting and exceeding digital accessibility. There are 3 levels of digital accessibility as outlined by the WCAG. Single A level is the basic fundamentals of accessibility. These are things you absolutely have no excuse for not doing. Double A level WCAG guidelines are the recommended level of accessibility. They're like the basic that you can put forth a little effort to do. They are reasonable levels of accessibility. And then triple A levels are the gold standards for accessibility, like the best practices that are currently known about. Let me give you an example. Take a video, for instance. At the A level, the basic fundamental of accessibility for a video is to have automated captions available. That is just the bottom line you need to come in at. Double A level specifies that those captions must be human edited. They must be fully accurate. Right now, automated captions are not fully accurate. That's why we depend on human edited captions to get us all the way there. And then triple A level, the gold standard for accessibility with a video with spoken language content, is that you're going to have fully accurate captions available. You're also going to have American Sign Language interpretation, ASL interpretation available. You're also going to have a transcript, a text-based transcript available. That's the gold standard. And at UVM, legally, we need to meet just the double A level. So in our video example, that is fully accurate captions. The WCAG guidelines apply to nearly everything in terms of digital content. Websites, multimedia, social media, electronic documents, but also email and email newsletters. So think about your email signature. That needs to be accessible. You need to try to make your emails themselves accessible so that you don't know when you are sending content, you are sending messages to colleagues who have certain types of disabilities. You just want to try to make all of your emails as accessible as possible. Email newsletters, similarly, you are wanting to work with the WCAG guidelines to make that content as accessible as possible. Social media, you're largely dependent on the specifications of the platform, what the platform allows you to do. Electronic documents generally have their own automated accessibility checkers. We're going to talk a lot about those. But then also presentations. There are ways to make your presentations more accessible and less accessible. And events. Think about the last time you signed up for or attended an event, right? So one of the silver linings of the cloud of the COVID-19 pandemic is that video conferencing, video attendance at events became much more widespread. Okay, so that video live stream, that's going to need captions to be accessible, right? That's going to need some amount of potentially image description or visual descriptions. Think about how you sign up for events. You're generally registering online. Those registration forms need to be accessible. Are you sending out an agenda for the event in advance? You are if you're wanting to be accessible and inclusive. And that document needs to be accessible. The minutes that are taken at the meeting and sent out afterwards, you're thinking about accessibility there. So it affects so many different things about where we are with our lives in the 21st century. The WCAGs are, unfortunately, written in highly technical language, and so the Office of Accessibility Services strongly recommends this link, which is a website called WCAG in Plain English. It translates each of the 13 guidelines into plain English. They are rewritten the way that people actually talk. And this project was entirely led by people with disabilities who were able to say like, there's a better way to unpack this particular guideline. Let's explain this more based on what people with disabilities are telling us about how this works. So this is a great site to have available if you have questions about the WCAG guidelines. So the WCAG guidelines themselves, the AA level set of guidelines, there are 13 of them, and they are broken into 4 separate categories, which have a handy, easy to remember acronym. The guidelines, these categories are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. If you put those together, you get the word pour, as in to tip liquid from one item into another or out of one item. So POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Category 1, perceivable. People should be able to experience and interact with the website or the electronic document, the presentation, the video, using the senses available to them. Not everyone can see. Not everyone can hear. That should not present a barrier for people to be able to experience and interact with your content. Here are some perceivable guidelines. Give text alternatives to non-textual content. Non-textual content is anything that is not highlightable, interactable text. So those are images, those are videos, those are podcasts, audio files. All of those are non-textual content. And you want to think about giving a text alternative for those. So take our example of the video. The video is a non-textual content piece. We want to give some kind of text alternative to that non-textual content. In the case of a video, that can be captions. It can be a transcript. I have on here no images of text. Images of text are really difficult for people who are using assistive technology to grapple with. So images of text are not themselves textual content. Images of text are non-textual content because images are themselves just colored pixels sitting next to one another, and they can't be treated by a web browser or by assistive technology as actual text. They're just pictures. So audio and video content, you can present a transcript, a text transcript. You can provide captions for video content. And you can choose tools that allow people to magnify or minimize text with no information loss. So I have seen very recently a online management website for lab productions is what I'm going to say. We're not going to name any names. We're not going to point any fingers. We're just going to give you an example. It's a really broad example. Stay with me. So this online clearinghouse, it allows people to manage their lab work and for customers to book lab work that they would like to have done. Say they have a test that they want to have run by a lab that specializes in those particular tests. Okay, those people can show up and say, hey, I would like to pay you to book this to do this test. Please do this test for me. Please send me the results. But that particular organizing platform, when you magnify it, you can't access the button that allows you to say, book this test. it disappears when you use magnification. Now, I am not on screen. My image is not on screen, but I wear very thick glasses. I have very poor vision, and magnify my screen quite a bit. My cursor, the size of my cursor is slightly alarming. It is nearly a half inch long, and it's outlined in red, so I have an easier time finding it against all kinds of different colored backgrounds. But that is one example of how I am choosing to interact with digital content. I have to magnify things quite a bit in order to be able to make out the text, even with my glasses on. So you're looking to only use tools that allow people like myself to magnify the text or to minimize the text. I know people who like their text very, very teeny, in ways that you want to make sure that all the website works. You want to make sure that everything is available to look at in the document. You want to make sure that the email newsletter still lays out nicely. So that those are some perceivable guidelines. Category two is operable. People should be able to find and use content on the website regardless of how they access it. For example, with assistive technologies. And again, when I say website here, I'm also talking about electronic documents. I'm talking about social media. I'm talking about web apps. But lots of people interact with digital content using things other than mice. When I say mice, I mean the digital mouse, not the animal, the mouse. Okay, lots of people use a keyboard, for instance, to access everything online. My partner only uses a keyboard to access everything online. That's a personal choice. I have a cousin who has a severe motion restriction in her hands and fingers. She uses text to speech. And speech to text. So she issues voice commands to her computer in order to load and change and read websites. I have a colleague who has essential tremor, so she has more difficulty moving her hand, especially her dominant hand, than she has to use extra energy to use a mouse. And so it's much easier for her also to use a speech-based tool to access a website or to bop around with the keyboard. You think about a canonical mouse, you have to make an arch with your hand, right? Hold your hand up for picture a mouse in the air, hold your hand up, put your hand around it, you're making an arch around that mouse, right? You're going to drop your hand over it in an arch. Or you have to keep your hand completely flat if you have a trackpad mouse. And that can be really difficult for people who are working with limitations in their hands and fingers. And this is why we have assistive technologies. And assistive technologies get more helpful from there. I just listened to a great podcast episode with a person who had lost the ability to use one of their arms and hands, and actually was someone who wrote about design and accessibility, and so had to begin inventing their own assistive technology. Like how can you amend a traditional keyboard so that it works for only one hand without having to move your hand a lot? So there are also mouth sticks for people who are quadriplegic, who have the most power available to them in their mouth. They can, bite, blow, or suck on the mouth stick in order to move around. There are eye trackers where the screen is receptive to where the person's gaze is, and that's what opens, closes, and reads websites with them. So you have all these different people who are making it work, who are figuring out ways to operate websites and documents and social media. And so this is why we have operable as a category of guidelines. Here are some operable guidelines. Keyboards are by far the most commonly used piece of assistive technology, so you want to make sure everything works with a keyboard. Test it with a keyboard. Animations. Animations should be controllable by the user. You should be able to turn them on and off, most specifically off. Why? Because animations can trigger seizures and migraines and headaches in some people. And so if you're going to build an animation into something, it should be controllable by the user. The user should be able to say like, "Hey, no, no, thank you. That's going to destroy my day." And take it one step further, and you really want to have like uh, a text-based version of any information the animation would be presenting you, unless it's a purely decorative animation. Use bypass blocks whenever possible. A bypass block is an anchor or a link that allows you to whip back and forth between the top of the page and a different section of the page. Who here has ever looked for a recipe online? One of the best parts of the internet still is that so many people put their recipes online and are just like, hey, you can make this. But there's become this trend in recipes where the author of the recipe wants you to stay on their website as long as humanly possible. So they tell you their life story and they're like, and now a brief history of the egg. And you're like, oh gosh, no thanks. And so more frequently, templates for recipe web pages have a link or a button that says jump to recipe. You can just bypass the history of the egg and jump to the recipe. That's an example of a bypass block. Similarly, when you open a document and that document has a table of contents that has links to the different chapters of the documents, those are bypass blocks. Use descriptive links and unique page titles to aid navigation. That makes it much easier for people who are using assistive technology to know where they're going and to get where they're going. And do not use flashing content. Again, flashing content, just like animations, can trigger seizures in people. There's nothing you're putting online or out into the world that is so important that it's more important than someone not having a seizure. Category 3, understandable. People should be able to understand the website's content and how the website works. So back in the heady early days of the internet, there was a fashion for not using standard menu terms in our websites. Anyone who was on angelfire.com in 1998, put your hand up. Anyone on Diaryland? Yep. Where instead of saying, for instance, contact us, there would be an artsy link that said 5 horses running downhill in the mud or something to that nature. And it died out because it was really hard to figure out what was happening on that website. It was really hard to figure out what link did what. If, some of them were named horses running downhill in the mud, and others were named the color of my insanity or the color of my musings. So that's why you want to use like standard website terms. Menu, home, about, contact. People should be able to understand the website's content and how the website works. So some understandable guidelines are: allow software to determine the language of the page. The internet is international. Not everyone speaks English. And assistive technology, not all assistive technology is working in English. Some assistive technology is working in, of course, the language that the person who uses it prefers. That's not always English. And the way that we help assistive technology work with digital content is to make sure that right up front we're saying, hey, this content is in French, this content is in English, this content is in Hebrew, and Hebrew is a language read right to left rather than how English reads left to right. And so the software will be like, you got it, chief, I'm going to go read right to left. So you're also going to want to make the text readable and understandable. This is actually something that will help you with your search engine algorithm getting more popular. That is one of the making the text readable and understandable, well-structured text, easy to understand text. That gives you more points with a search engine algorithm. It makes your content more popular. You're going to make sure that all form fields have visible and meaningful labels. If you are asking someone to contribute, to enter their name into a form, some of the form fields should have either name, or it should say last name. Another form field says first name or legal name. Like, be very specific as to labeling your form fields and make it easy to identify when form fields were incorrectly filled in. So, have you ever filled out a form incorrectly? I did it just this morning. And when you hit submit, the form comes back and says, hey, go ahead and just re-enter your information. But it didn't tell me what I had done wrong. So I didn't want to refill every single form field. I just wanted to correct one error. Like, just tell me what I screwed up. I screw up things all the time. Just tell me. Point to it. I can do it again. I can do it better. So those are understandable guidelines. And category 4 is robust. Content must be usable by a wide range of software and hardware, and that includes current, legacy, and expected browsers and assistive technology. Avoid using tools that say, this tool is only usable if you're in Internet Explorer or Chrome. Like, no, we can't do that anymore. This is not 2007. Content must be usable by a wide range of software, and it also must integrate with the hardware that is commonly used with assistive technology. So remember our mouse stick, our keyboards, all that falls under the category of robust. And some robust guidelines are just go ahead and fix any errors that you have found. Could be errors with your HTML, could be error in your Word doc, could be error in your PDF. Don't use tools that are browser dependent. Again, those tools that say, hey, I'm only going to work in Chrome. Like, no, no, sorry. It's not 2007 anymore. All browsers, some people with disabilities most commonly use web browsers as their default piece of assistive technology because web browsers, you can customize them so much. You can change the color of the text, the size of the text. You can make the browser read to you. You can make it read left to right. You can make it read right to left. You can make it highlight the text. You can make that cursor an obnoxious little half-inch long and outlined in red because your glasses are humongous. Uh, so don't use any tool that says it will only work with a certain range of browsers. What that's saying is that tool is not interested in working with all people with disabilities. Test with assistive technology whenever possible, or test with available automated testers. Now, automated testers in the year 2026 only catch about 30% of accessibility errors. So your most powerful accessibility tester is your own self and or any people with disabilities that you hire to give you feedback on what they're experiencing when they access your work. Now, good news, at the University of Vermont, many of the guidelines are not actually your responsibility. And so the Office of Accessibility Services has put together a page called Working with the WCAG Guidelines, and it goes through each of the 13 guidelines, each of the levels, and it lets you know which of the ones you actually need to take care of yourself and which of the ones you can use UVM sponsored or UVM recommended tools to make sure that you're already covered with that. An example is there are many guidelines that are covered simply if you build your website using the UVM specific Drupal 10 system that the UVM web tech team has put so much effort into. They handled a number of the guidelines so that you don't have to think of them. By the same token, you're always going to have to think about color contrast because there's no one tool that's going to automate that for you. You should get used to working with a tester and learning how to think about color contrast. But go to that page and take a look at what we have available, and that will cut down on the amount of work you have to do, cut down on the amount you have to learn. You also want to start with a good toolkit, a good kit full of accessibility tools. So we talked about the WCAG in Plain English website. This will help you understand more about these accessibility guidelines. There is a tool called the WebAIM Wave tool. You can feed this tool any website and it will give you an overview of the accessibility errors it sees on that website. If you're building a website, on any platform, you can use that tool to get a basic understanding of what some of the accessibility errors are. Data Wrapper is a free online tool that creates customizable charts and graphs that let you calculate the color contrast of the various pieces of the charts and graphs, lets you switch between a light version and a dark version. Maybe you want to provide both of those so that your users can choose what works best for their eyes. The TPGI color contrast tool is a free, downloadable, and installable tool. It is platform independent and it measures two colors. It measures text versus background to ensure that there's adequate color contrast between the two. There's a lot of math involved in calculating the ratio to make sure that it meets the color contrast guidelines, and that tool will do all the math for you. ConvertCase is a website where you can upload an image, a full color image, and see what it looks like in grayscale. 1 in 10 people have some type of what's known as color blindness. They don't have access to all of the colors. And so you'll be able to look at various types of color blindness as well as full color blindness, where you're just seeing the world in shades of gray. So be able to make sure that your image is like, what if you have information in the image that is necessary for a person to understand or make full use of the content you're putting out? So an example of this might be that you are putting out a document on forests in Vermont, and you want to include a photo of a forest in Vermont to show two different types of trees growing next to one another. They're both evergreen trees, but there are slight differences. Okay, upload that photo to ConvertCase and double check that when someone's looking at those two evergreen trees that look real similar but have slight differences, make sure that it's not that one is like slightly quote unquote lighter green. If you can't see green, that's not going to help you understand these trees. Brandwood is a website that allows you to upload an image that you might want to think about putting text over the top of. Putting text on a busy photo background is always dicey, dicey, dicey. Always very difficult to get enough of a color contrast between the text and the background, unless you have a background in design and you're putting in a little overlay. There's a whole art and science to it, but Brandwood will measure different colors of text on top of your busy photo background and tell you if it has enough color contrast. We're going pretty deep into this idea of color contrast because, again, this is one of the guidelines that you're going to actually have to work with yourself with your own noggin. It's not something that can be automated soup to nuts. It can't be automated start to finish. Captions, transcripts, and audio description. The Office of Accessibility Services provides free human-edited captions, transcripts, and audio description for UVM community members. That's staff, student, faculty, or departments. We do it all for free. There's usually a 2 to 3 day turnaround, but whatever you need, whatever topic it's on, whatever length of that video, we have you covered. Audio description is something where you have video that has no spoken dialogue in it, but has a lot of visuals. Okay, if you are blind, you cannot see the visuals. And without dialogue, you may not be able to understand that there are visuals conveying information in the video. And that's where audio description comes in, is you can have a narrator come and describe the visuals that are occurring. UVM provides free access to Qualtrics, which is a standardized set of form software that it takes care of a number of accessibility issues for you. And then if you are creating maps, Google Maps has ways to create accessible and embeddable maps. ArcGIS also creates accessible embeddable maps. 6 of one, half dozen the other. It's really, those are more difficult to embed. And a lot of folks that I've worked with really appreciate being able to embed and carry along the map that they're creating. So, most common accessibility errors we're going to run into. When I say most common, I mean that the Utah State University every single year runs their automated website checker. They're the folks who built the WebAIM Wave tool. They run the WebAIM Wave tool on the 1 million most popular websites on the internet every year. And I put a reference here, a link to their 2025 findings. But based on that work that they're doing, the 4 most common accessibility errors are images that are missing alt text, poor color contrast, accessibility errors with forms, and link errors. Let's talk about all of these. Let's start with our images. So you want to describe any image with either alt text, which is alternative text. It'll pop up as a box that will allow you to enter text equivalent summary of the image, or you can do a long image description. So, say you're on Instagram and it's actually pretty difficult to reach the alt text boxes on an Instagram post. You can just write in the post itself image description, colon, and then give 1 to 3 sentences of what's going on in your image. And again, you want to avoid images of text. If you're using an image of text, know that there are many, many people who don't have access to images, are either blind or low vision, or are colorblind, or are browsing with images off. I live in northern Addison County, and our internet services are spicy and exciting. And so sometimes if the internet is very slow, I'll just browse with images off because I need to get things done. And I can still get a lot of things done when I don't have the images load on a page. I'm just goal oriented at that point. So I'm browsing with images off. So there, I'm absolutely depending on alt text or the image description to get my information. But you want to avoid images of text, especially creating vital information for understanding what the task is or how something works. That information needs to be somewhere other than as an image of text. And again, text on complicated backgrounds, not only is it more difficult for people to read who have a variety of different vision issues, but it also can contribute to migraines or headaches or a general feeling of unwell for some types of people. So be thinking of that. So how do you do alt text? Alt text generally you want 1 to 3 short, descriptive sentences, concise, active voice. Work that active voice. Don't let yourself be worked by passive voice. You want to describe the main action. Stay focused on what the main point of the image is. Say that you're including an image of a man who's been eaten partially by a polar bear in a lounge with a fireplace. You want to describe that there is a polar bear and an injured man. And you maybe don't want to spend time describing the pattern of the wallpaper for this image because it's not the most germane part of the image. If you're not using a real world photo, identify what type of image you are including right at the beginning of your alt text. So some examples of things that are not photos are screenshots, line drawings, bar graphs, pie charts, photorealistic depiction, photoshopped depiction, cartoon, or a thumbnail. And you don't want to start your alt text with quote unquote image of. All screen readers begin their descriptions with image of as a default. So if you also begin your description with image of, then the person who's using the screen reader is going to hear image of man being eaten by polar bear. And with alt text, context is really key. Images that are decorative, you can decide to artifact out and not include alt text. Um, if it's a decorative piece if it's a decorative colophon at the top of a section, then you may not need to have it described in detail, if at all. But if it's the central point of the text, so again, that photo of the 2 evergreen trees that are slightly different varieties, that's a critical part of the learning concept in our example and should be described as thoroughly as you can in 1 to 3 short, active sentences. If the image involves spurring an action, so it could represent an activity, like a pencil icon representing a writing exercise or a headphone icon representing a listening exercise. Just highlight the functional role, and that will facilitate navigation. So say I'm including a headphone icon to alert students that they are going to need to do a listening exercise. Then I would probably use the alt text icon of headphones. those headphones are germane to listening to the exercise that's coming up. So let's do an alt text exercise together. On screen, I have not an image of, because we know that a screen reader reading this would already say image of. So let's say I have an illustration of planets in our solar system. And the caption of this illustration is Figure 1-1, the orbiting paths of the 8 planets in our solar system around the sun: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Poor old Pluto. What would be the best alt text to include with this image, given the caption that we've just outlined? Would it be option A, Figure 1-1? Option B, photorealistic diagram of the sun and planets in our solar system. The orbiting paths are, from the sun outwards, a dark orange line for Mercury, a yellow line for Venus, green for Earth, red line for Mars, light orange line for Jupiter, pastel yellow line for Saturn, light blue line for Uranus, and dark blue line for Neptune. And finally, option C. The sun and planets are in the order of their distance from the sun. Pluto, previously known as the 9th planet in our solar system, is now considered a dwarf planet. This declassification took place in August of 2006, and Pluto's orbit is represented by a purple line. Okay, the answer is B. B is simply describing what's happening in the illustration. Option A, Figure 1-1. That's far too short. That doesn't give very much context about what the art looks like. And option C, where it goes off into a digression about the fate of Pluto. And that's not really germane to the art that's being presented. Whereas option B talks about the colors that are involved in the orbits and talks about the ordering of the planets and what type of art it is. It's a photorealistic diagram. I think it actually might be a photoshopped diagram, but we're going to work with it for what we have right now. So looking at color contrast, one of the most common accessibility errors for digital content. No one has time to do the math themselves. The asterisk there is if you are a big math nerd, I will absolutely help you figure out how to do the math yourself so you can enjoy yourself. But in general, we want to save time. We want tools to help us do our work more efficiently. And so I have a screenshot of the TPGI Color Contrast Analyzer tool. You install this tool on your machine. It will work for Linux, Unix, Windows, and Mac. And you use the eyedropper tool on the screenshot. It's labeled Color Picker. You use the eyedropper tool to sample your foreground color and you sample your background color. And the tool will automatically tell you, based on the WCAG 2.1 results, whether you're passing AA for text versus a background, and also for UI components like icons or other graphical objects. And it will actually give you the contrast ratio in numbers so that you have a good idea of what you're working with. And it gives you sliders that you can change. So say that you sampled your text, you sampled your background, and it almost meets the ratio requirements, but it doesn't quite. We can work with the sliders and maybe get like a darker blue to increase your contrast against a white text or something like that, so that you'll be able to go back and immediately change it in the moment. Also want you to feel free to join the UVM accessibility team that the Office of Accessibility Services has put together on Microsoft Teams. We have a whole team that is very low pressure, very low action. You can always just show up onto the team and post a question in any of the channels. And I'm available to answer questions. Other folks on my team are available to answer questions to help get you unblocked and keep you moving with your work. And I host drop-in accessibility hours now every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Teams. And in the slides for this presentation, there are links to both of those so that you can just jump in and join that team, or jump in if it's a Tuesday at 10 a.m. and get your questions answered. And if nobody brings questions for the drop-in accessibility hours, I will just start talking about a topic of my choosing, which is very frequently color contrast. I have to say, I love talking about color contrast. And finally, thank you for watching this far into this presentation. And I want you to resist the freak out, because it can feel really overwhelming to get up and running with accessibility work, to get up and running with incorporating accessibility into your workflow. So here's my recommendation. Take just one thing from this presentation and try it for 30 days. Maybe for the next 30 days, you're going to become an alt text whiz. You're going to do such a great job with alt text for the next 30 days. You're going to write yourself a little post-it note that says, remember your alt text, and put that post-it note up on the corner of your laptop screen. And just for 30 days, you're just trying to get a little bit better about alt text. And then at the end of 30 days, you're like, I feel like I'm starting to build some muscle memory there. I'm starting to get it into my workflow. So you take your post-it down and you write a second post-it. And your second post-it is, remember to check color contrast. You're like, oh, okay. Next 30 days, I'm doing color contrast. Then you're doing captions. Then you're doing transcripts. You're just processing. It's an ongoing process to get up and running with accessibility. And the Office of Accessibility Services believes in you. We know you can do this. We know that you want people with disabilities to feel welcome and able to contribute. We want us to be included at UVM, in the UVM community. So you got this. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, jump on to that accessibility team.